I want to invite you to take a look at the cover of your worship program. This is a painting by Rembrandt, and it is a painting of the prodigal. And in this painting, we have the prodigal, the wayward son, who is kneeling before his father. And he's come before his father after blowing his inheritance on what the Bible, one translation refers to as quote-unquote riotous living. And when I was a boy hearing the passage, that sounded really intriguing. I didn't know what riotous living was, but this guy had blown his inheritance, having way too much fun, and then he'd been caught up in a famine. He had lost everything. And as a boy, I didn't quite know what that meant, but I knew that he had paid a price, and he had been broken and humbled, and he had come back to his father to hire himself out as a servant to his father. And then look at the father and Rembrandt's depiction of the look on the father's face, the love, the tenderness that we see in this painting that the father has for his wayward son. Such love, such tenderness. In the previous 2 weeks, we've explored the journey of the wayward son, and we've explored the journey of the loving father. But the third character is in the shadows, over the shoulder of the father. You see that kind of bleached out face in the shadows. That is Rembrandt's depiction of the eldest son. In the shadows. Not willing to go fully into the room. He is on the outside looking in. And we can only imagine what he is feeling. And notice how his hands are clutched to his chest, as if he is holding himself together because his rage and his pain is so deep. Have you ever felt like you're in the shadows? That you are holding on to such pain and such resentment that you literally have to clutch your chest to keep yourself together? I invite you, if you wish, to turn to Luke's Gospel, chapter 15, and to return to the story, but particularly we're going to focus on the eldest brother. And we're going to pick up the story in verse 25, Luke chapter 15, verse 25. And we know that the father has welcomed the wayward son and thrown a party with the ring and the robe and the fatted calf, and the band is playing. Now, verse 25, now his elder son was in the field. And as he came and drew near the house, he heard the music and the dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And the servant replied in verse 27, and he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound. Verse 28, but he was enraged and refused to go in and to see his brother or to meet his father. So his father came out and entreated him. But the eldest son said, listen, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a goat that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours, not this brother of mine, but when this son of yours came who had devoured your living with prostitutes, you killed for him the fatted calf. And can you imagine the father looking upon his son, and all he sees is rage? Have you ever felt like the eldest son? Have you ever kept score? Am I the only one who keeps score? When our daughters were little, we would have to carefully count the Christmas gifts. Lindsay would have to get 10 gifts. Caitlin would have to get 10 gifts. Tricia would point out to me that some of the gifts were bigger for Caitlin than they were for Lindsay. As little girls, they were keeping score. The eldest brother is keeping score. He has done everything required of him, and he has not received a party, a band, the fatted calf, the ring on his finger. It hasn't happened for him. But this knucklehead of a brother, he's gotten everything. It's not fair. You ever keep score? One of the stories in my extended family is of two sisters, now both well on in years. And if you listen to their stories long enough, you're going to hear this. When they were little girls, their parents were going through a divorce. And the father chose one of the daughters to be his favorite. The mother chose the other daughter to be her favorite. And as these parents were in the battle of ending their marriage, they pitted the two girls, just girls, elementary age, against one another. And one of the sisters can tell you this story as if it happened yesterday, even though it was 70+ years ago, about how she watched her sister open a package under the tree from their father. And there was a pair of beautiful white ice skates. They were gorgeous. And then this other sister who watched opened her package from their father, and she received a pair of socks. 70 years have passed, and when this sister tells her story, it's as if it happened yesterday, and she hasn't stopped keeping score. And these two sisters, while they live within 20 minutes of one another, rarely, if ever, speak. Have you ever felt like the eldest brother, holding on to old wounds and old resentments and old hurts that we just can't let go of on our own? And so the eldest brother says, I'm not going into that party. My brother doesn't deserve it. My father hasn't been fair to me. I'm washing my hands of both. Pick up the story in verse 30. 31. And the father said to the son, the eldest son, you are always with me, and all that that is mine is yours. You're always with me, and everything I have is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad, for this, your brother was dead, and he's alive. He was lost to us, but he's been found. This is a story that has legs. And by that I mean it has legs 2,000 years later because it's our story. I would suggest that there's a little bit of the wayward son in each of us, maybe more than a little. There's a little bit of the loving parent in each one of us. And there's a little bit, maybe more than a little, of the elder brother in us as well. And the reason we tell this story is because it's a reflection of our story as human beings. And it is fundamentally and foundationally a story of God's grace, God's love, that comes without merit to the elder son and can't be lost, and the same grace and love is offered to the wayward son. And that's what the eldest son can't accept. That the grace is complete, it's lavish, it's deeper. It doesn't keep score. It isn't fair. It's the nature of God. Jesus is telling us in this parable, it's the nature of God to love us completely, selflessly. And it's been referred to by one theologian as a scandal of our faith because it isn't fair. There aren't winners and losers. The very nature of God, Jesus is saying in this story, is to love us, accept us, forgive us, and bless us, and to welcome us home. Gary Kyle shared this comment. He said, I don't think it should be just the prodigal son, singular. It should be the prodigal sons. Because they have both lost their way, haven't they? And the one constant in the story is the loving parent who welcomes them home. Many of us haven't known that kind of love. Many of us haven't known that kind of limitless, unconditional acceptance. Henry Nouwen, the great Catholic writer and psychologist, says that the antidote to resentment and old wounds, which as human beings we hold on to, don't we? Don't we hold on to old resentments and old wounds and old hurts? He says the antidote, the get-out-of-jail-free card, is summed up in two words: trust. The first word is trust, and the second word is gratitude. Another word for trust is believe. Belief. We are invited to believe that the God who waited for the wayward son in the distance every day while he was away, and then ran out while he was still a long way off and embraced him and kissed him and loved him, that same God is waiting for us and will always embrace us and care for us. Trust in this story, says Henry Nouwen. Trust in this story, says Jesus, that the God who welcomed the wayward son and who always had his heart open to the eldest son is waiting for us as well. Do we believe that to be true? And if we believe it to be true, says Henry Nouwen, then we are to have a grateful heart, where we're no longer keeping score, but we're grateful for what we have. It's been said that we remember who we are as we remember the ones and the one to whom we belong. As people of faith, our worth is found in relationship to God. And in community, we remind each other that we are cherished and loved. The antidote to our resentments, our antidote to shame and blaming ourselves or blaming others, is remembering that the God who waited and looked in the distance for his son to return is also awaiting us, because the nature of God is love. You've heard me share this quote before. Scott and Susan have heard this quote before. But to me, it's at the very heart of the Christian story, which is a story of grace. And grace is God's limitless love. And here's what the theologian Philip Yancey said: there's nothing we can do to make God love us more. Eldest son, you can't earn it. You can't deserve it because you work so hard in the field. You've done all the right things. You can't earn it. There's nothing we can do to make God love us more. And there's nothing we can do, wayward son, wayward daughter, to make God love us less. The scandal of our faith is that God's nature is to love us and to always be looking for us and to always, always welcome us home. So the two sisters in my extended family, living 20 miles apart, hadn't spoken for several years. Last time they had seen one another was at a funeral for a family member. So one of the sisters hears a knock on her door. Now well into her 80s, she goes to the door, and there's her sister. And she has a bag of corn from her farm in Rhode Island. She has a bag of corn. And she said, I was picking the corn this morning, and I thought of you. And I thought of how long it has been since we've spoken, and how tired I am, and I hope you are, of holding on to our old wounds and our old hurts. Would you take this corn? That's grace. The story doesn't end in this parable. We don't know what the eldest brother does. And I'm not going to tell you what the other sister did in this story either. Because it's our story, each and every one of us, as to whether we will receive grace when it's offered to us, whether we'll accept it, and it's each of our story whether we will offer that grace to others who have wronged us. This story has legs, doesn't it? Because it's our story. Thanks be to God, and may God's people say,